Hello, fellow crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonSaysDM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana video. Today I have a colorful ink blended card featuring what I call angled ink blending to create a bold and colorful background and also some simple silhouette stamping. I was playing in my craft room the other day and I created this background and stamped several trees from the All Season Tree stamp set by SimonSaysDM. And I quite like that background, but I wanted to change it a little bit and make it different in a way. And also I wanted to recreate this card idea, but in a different size, in a new mini slimline size. Now to help me visualize and plan my idea, I made a little sketch on a piece of paper here. You can see that I have several sections. I have the sky section, the ocean section, and the land section. And I want each of those sections to consist of at least 2, and better yet, 3 different subsections, if you will, each blended in a different color of ink. Here I have a panel of white cardstock. This is cut right now to 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches, but we will later trim it down to work for the new mini slimline card size, and I'll show you the measurements for that later on once we're finished with the ink blending. I have a sheet of grid paper underneath my background. This will help me to protect my work surface from all that ink, but it will also help me align my stencils as I do my ink blending. Now, as for the stencils that I'm using to make this background, you can use pretty much anything. You basically just need a straight line, and then you also need a circle stencil or a circle mask. The stencils or the masks that I have picked for this card are from the A2 masks from SimonSaysDM. These are the rectangle pieces that I'm using, and I also have the slimline scene builder stencil, and I'll use that to ink blend a sun for my card. So first, I'm going to use one of the smaller pieces and attach it onto my background. I'm using the new yellow tape from Spellbinders. I love this tape to tape all the things down onto my projects while I'm working. So I'm taping that onto my panel, and I'm going to ink blend the background. Now, I have already selected several ink colors, and I'm starting by ink blending purple. This is a deep purple from SimonSaysDM. I'm using my mini round ink blending tool from Ranger, but I have a Spellbinders foam at the end of that tool, as that is what I prefer to use with the Ranger ink blending tools, and that is what I prefer to use for ink blending. I've ink blended the first portion of my sky, and the way I like to do this is I like to bring the ink heavily from one side. So I'm angling my ink blending tool. I'm using just the edge of the tool, and I'm blending heavily right where the stencil meets the paper. So that's where I have the highest concentration of the ink, and that's where that section is going to be the darkest. I'm going to clean up the stencil. I'm just wiping it with a cloth that I have in my craft room, and I'm going to reposition it onto the panel. But this time I am positioning it slightly lower, so I'm leaving a bit of a white gap on the paper. Hopefully you can see that a little bit here. And once I add the second color of ink, you'll be able to see that white gap on the background. You can see that I'm using basically just an edge, so you can use whatever you have in your stash to recreate this look, as we basically just need a straight edge to ink blend this background. Next, I have Hollyhock, and I'm going to repeat the same step. So I'm loading my ink blending tool with this ink. I'm angling it, and I'm using just the edge of the tool, and I'm bringing the ink from the bottom up. So I'm adding a heavier layer of the ink at the very bottom where the stencil meets the paper, and I'm ink blending a lot lighter towards the top where this pink color meets the purple. When I remove the stencils, you can see that I have a nice white line, a white gap in between the 2 ink blended areas. Now I feel like I need to add a little bit more of that pink, so I'm going to reposition the stencils and ink blend some more. So my sky is going to consist of 3 sections. I'm going to have purple at the very top, pink, and also a little bit of yellow. I had the first 2 sections sort of angled, But I need to create the third ink blended section, that yellow section, so that I have a straight horizon line. And this is where the grid lines on the paper pad that I have on my work surface come into play. I'm actually using that to make sure I align my stencil properly. To ink blend the yellow color, I'm using Simon's Darkling ink, and once again, using the same concept, loading my ink blending tool and using just the edge of that tool to ink blend the yellow portion of the sky onto my paper, making sure that I have a heavier layer of yellow at the bottom and then a much lighter layer of yellow at the very top. Now, I do want to add a sun to this section of the card. For this, I'm going to use the Slimline Scene Builder stencil from Simon. It has that nice round sun or circle, which I will use as a sun. And I've already taped a part of that stencil to make sure I don't accidentally ink blend the other shapes onto this background. So I'm keeping the previously attached stencils or guides in place, and I'm layering this stencil on top of that so that I can ink blend a portion of that sky. Now for that, I'm using Simon's Sunshine ink. And again, I'm going to ink blend the sun a lot heavier at the bottom and a little bit lighter towards the top. To make this sun look a little bit more realistic, I'm also going to add two other colors that I have happening in my sky. The hollyhock, that nice pink. I did clean my stencil. I did wipe it a little bit with the cloth that I have here just to make sure that I do not contaminate my hollyhock with the previously applied sunshine that was still sitting on the stencil. So I'm adding the hollyhock to add just a little bit of pink, and the pink mixing with the yellow, it creates a very warm orange color. And then I'm also going to add that purple at the very, very edge of the sun, just so that it looks a little bit more real. It's going to look very dark, like the sun is actually setting and hitting the horizon line. And as I ink blend that purple, you can see quite well how I'm holding the ink blending tool at an angle. So I'm not using the whole surface of the ink blending tool, but rather just a teeny tiny edge of it. I'm going to remove the stencils. And look at that. I love how this sun looks, very realistic. I'm going to continue positioning the stencils, masking sections of my background, and ink blending my background. Now we're moving on to the sea or the ocean portion of the background. Now, before I was ink blending from the bottom up. Now I want to ink blend from the top down. Because it's easier for me to ink blend from the bottom up, I'm going to rotate my panel and continue ink blending from the bottom up, but because my panel is rotated 180 degrees, I'm actually ink blending from the top down. Now for this section of the ocean, I'm using the Audrey Blue ink from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm adding a rather generous amount of ink as I want this section to be the largest on my background. I'm going to remove the stencils. Once again, reposition them so that I have a little bit of that white gap. I think having that white gap is what makes this really nice and unique. It helps the different color sections stand out. And then I'm blending the next section using the Maliblue ink from Simon. Again, going heavier from the bottom and lighter towards the top. Now we're done with ink blending the ocean, and now it's time to ink blend the land. Now for this, you can use brown ink, perhaps a light brown if you wanted to create maybe a beach. I'm going to use green because I want to have a grassy hill. The first color I'm using is a darker green, and it's a green leaf. And again, I'm ink blending heavier from the bottom and lighter towards the top. Again, you can see here how I'm holding my ink blending tool at an angle, and I'm just using the edge of the tool to apply the ink onto the paper. And I quite like this look. I like how the ink fades into white. I like how it's darker on one end, but then it slowly, gradually fades into white. Having ink blended that, I'm going to once again reposition the stencils and ink blend the last portion of this background using the lighter ink color, which is Jelly Bean. Before I do that, I need to remove those pieces of tape that are holding my panel in place and reposition them on the other end so that I can ink blend that section properly without having any tape marks left on the background. I love how abstract this background looks, and I also love how colorful it is. There's so much color, it just makes me happy. Next, we need to add some stamping on top of the background. I have the All Seasons Tree stamp set from Simon. I love this stamp set. It has several silhouette trees that are perfect to be stamped in black. And when you stamp something in black, something that's very big and solid, such as these trees, it's always nice to have color going on in a different area on your card. And creating a colorful background like we did here is simply perfect for that. Now here's that panel once again, and you can see how the two panels compare. The one on the left is more monochromatic. You have lots of different blue colors, and then you have the light brown for the sand. And I did cluster 3 trees on that card. The other panel is a lot more colorful. So for this panel, I want to stamp only one of the trees. Here I have my Mini Misty stamping tool. Now this panel is a little bit too big to go inside the Misty, but that's fine. I have that bar magnet holding my panel in place, so I'm sure it's going to hold it there. The panel is not going to move, so I'm not worried about that. And I'm using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp that tree. And like I said, when you add solid black, a black silhouette over a colorful background, it just makes everything pop. That first impression was rather poor, so I'm just going to re-ink my stamp and re-stamp the tree onto the background. And look at that. It looks beautiful. Now, the sentiment that I want to use for this card reads, "Warm hugs, beautiful." You have several different sentiment options in this stamp set, and you can also create and build your own sentiments. I quite like this one, "Warm hugs, beautiful." And once again, I'm stamping that in the same VersaFine Onyx Black ink. So now that we have our panel created, we need to create a card base, and we need to trim this panel and add it on top of the card. I want to make a mini slimline card. This is a new size recently introduced by Simon, and I love it. I have the new mini slimline envelopes, and I think that this size is simply perfect. It's smaller than the regular slimline. It's a little bit different than the regular A2, so it's kind of new and fun to explore. Now, the size of the mini slimline envelope is 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Taking that into consideration, I'm going to make my card base a 1/4 inch smaller. So I'm going to score my white cardstock panel, and I'm starting with a letter sheet. So I'm going to score it at 3.25 inches. I'm using my scoring board and a scoring tool, and I'm just adding 1 vertical score line along the entire width of the paper. Going to fold that, use my scoring tool to reinforce that fold. And once that is done, I'm going to trim that using my paper trimmer so it's 3.25 inches wide. Now I'm also going to trim the length of this card base to 6.25 inches tall. So it is just a 1/4 inch smaller than my mini slimline envelope. Now, as for the ink blended panel, I want it to be even smaller than that, 1/4 inch smaller. So I'm going to trim it to 3 inches by 6 inches. I want to have a small wide border on my finished card, so that's why I'm trimming that extra 1/4 inch off. If you don't want that, just keep it as is, or trim it to 3.25 by 6.25 inches. And look at that. Looks really nice. I used foam adhesive tape and foam mounted the background onto my card base. And all that's left to do is to embellish this card with a couple of sequins. I pulled out my strawberry shortcake sequin mix from Simon, and I picked several sequins to correspond with the ink blended sections on my background. The sequin mix, it actually contains different colors. You would think it's just purples and pinks, but you can actually find a couple of light green sequins in there and a couple of light blue. So that's what I did. I picked light green sequins for the bottom of the panel. Then I have a small blue sequin and then some pink and yellow sequins at the top over there overlapping the sun. So that's it for me for today. I hope you found this video useful. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you guys are making. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.